So welcome, you guys. Uh, like Kathy said, my talk's going to be on the Canadian ski traverses. So basically, it's an A to B trip where you link up high passes and try to stay up in the ice fields. Typically, these are very remote trips in Canada, and there are a lot of them, and a variety of different kind of exposure levels with regards to how far and how more remote you'd like to go. Typically, you're carrying your own gear on these trips, so you're looking to be carrying upwards to about 30 kilograms of gear at least on your backs. There's potential to use pulks as well, but it really depends on the type of terrain that you're skiing. And so sometimes you're climbing relatively steep gradients, so maybe a pulk is not so ideal. But on the bigger ice fields, on the ice sheets, maybe that's a bit more advantageous. You can see this pack these guys are wearing more or less. That's probably about 7 or 8 days of food and tents and fuel and all that kind of stuff on their backpacks. And then you end up in places like this and you ski on down, and yeah, it's amazing. So it's a lot of hard work, but you get a lot out of satisfaction of kind of being in true wilderness, and definitely remote. You don't see many people, and if you do see people, you're quite happy to see them, and you'll go to your way to actually say hello and maybe have a cup of tea with them. And then you end up camping in places like this, where not many people have been, so they're pretty cool things. Maybe we'll just go a bit through basically orientation of where a lot of the traverses are. This is basic map of British Columbia and a bit of Alberta. And you can see kind of up and down, you have the coast mountains here. So you got the coast mountains down in this section. Columbia Mountain Basin through here. And then you got the Rockies. Predominantly the skiing would be around through here. So a lot of the traverses are in these areas where I've outlined. And yeah, they're different, different mountains, just like anywhere else. But if you look at kind of sizing compared to the Alps, it would just be the Rockies for square meters is where you put the Alps. So there's a lot of mountains and there's almost too much choice. So part of the problem is choosing where to go. And so a lot of that depends on the objectives you'd like to do. This yellow line that we have here, this is part of the Coast Mountain Traverse. So it's a series of smaller traverses. You can see them kind of interlinked here. So they have short sections, and they kind of join them up to form quite an epic trip. Something with regards to 2,300 kilometers. So people have done them. 2 groups have done them over the past little while. And and you're going through pretty rugged terrain, kind of like this. This is upwards towards Alaska and Juneau, but all through the Waddington, you're going through places. This is just the Waddington. And a lot of people spend a lot of time, and the gentleman in this photo, John Baldwin, has probably spent the most time in the Coast Mountains of anybody. And he's written basically the guidebook for that area, and extensively skied there and climbed through the Coast Mountains. Some pretty epic trips. In the Coast Mountain, there's also these guys that actually were the first ones to complete the trip in 2000 or 2001, I'm not entirely sure. It was Guy Edwards on the right and John Miller. And they went from Squamish to Skagway. And again, that was 2,300 kilometers. So you can imagine us skiing, how much logistics and planning and preparation would go into this trip. And they managed to do it. They had a close call with one of their groups actually almost getting paralyzed. and they found other partners halfway through and carried on. So pretty amazing that they kept on going 2,300 kilometers. And other ones that are maybe a bit more realistic for just logistically and time. This one is a classic. It's the Great Divide Ski Traverse. And this one is 350 kilometers with about 20,000 meters of elevation gain. So you're going up and down quite a bit. And it's pretty remote. It's pretty wild. The first time this was actually done was in 1967 by these guys. So a bit of history. The two names that I can remember right off the bat, the second person from the left is Charlie Locke. He now owns multiple ski resorts in Canada, in RMR, Lake Louise, Fernie, and that. And the other gentleman is on the far right-hand side, and that's Schick Scott. And he also spent a lot of time in the Rockies and the Columbia Basin, and he's also written a guidebook. So you can imagine these guys in 1967 traversing 350 kilometers of unknown terrain, really, apart from maps and maybe a couple photos here and there, in the gear that they had. And so it's a pretty amazing feat. And to say that it didn't have bad weather is probably unlikely. You know, when you're out there for 21 days, 22 days during the trip, you're going to get nailed by a couple storms. And these guys did get nailed. And you can imagine having the gear that they had would have been different. It would have been a lot harder, I think. But they managed to go and do it. It's pretty cool. Other trips that you can do are in the Columbia Basin. So you got, let's draw this. Right here is the Great Divide. And then interlinking all the single ones, this one's actually the Columbia Traverse. It still hasn't been completed in its entirety. And it's 750 kilometers. And part of the reason is the complexity of terrain, and also the snowpack can be difficult. And so it's not really conducive. It's a lot of up and down compared to the Coast Mountain for its general length. So it's a bit more committing, and it's far easier to get kind of pushed off this kind of ski traverse. Anyways, you can see that there's a lot of ski choices, and actually in this, there's a traverse that goes this way. There's a traverse that goes up through here. There's smaller traverses that do this. And so all the way through here, if you can pick part of map, you can kind of figure a way through it. But the general ones are the main ones are the ones that are displayed here that I didn't draw. And so it's kind of neat. Just kind of an endless choice. Maybe some skills required. Might be worthwhile discussing that. First of all, you need to be able to ski pretty decent in any conditions, and be able to ski with, up to 65 pounds or 30 plus kilograms worth of gear on your backpack, or ski within a pulk, and then you're probably not skiing as much. And sometimes the skiing isn't pretty, breakable crust, frozen chicken heads. So these roller balls turned into little balls. We call them chicken heads back home. And so sometimes you have to take it easy, and sometimes you look really good, and sometimes you look really bad. Maybe a bit of avalanche training would help. Part of the reason for this is that a lot of the terrain that you're going to probably end up in, some of it doesn't have a forecast, especially on the Coast Mountain. There's a lack of forecasting just because there's a lot of practitioners. There's a lack of practitioners in the area, and so there's no forecast. So you're going to have to make your own decisions, regardless whether there's a bulletin or not. But even more so with Canadian bulletins, they're pretty general. They kind of give you a general idea of the layers that you have to look out for, and what to do. Part of the thing that traverses work is obviously because it's springtime. So it's usually just a melt freeze issue that you're dealing with. So it's a crust in the morning, and then it decomposes, gets warm in the afternoon, and then that's the time you stop skiing. It's pretty easy. So that usually is how it works. The problem is when it gets too warm, or you have persistent weak layers of sorts. So you definitely need some kind of avalanche training, knowledge of how to pick a decent route through complex terrain, because that's what you'll be going through. Obviously, map reading skills, navigation, how to use a compass, and then general whiteout navigation. Somewhere in your traverse, you're going to end up in a situation where you won't necessarily be able to see anything, and you might have to proceed on in order to make it to a food cache or get past a crux point before you run out of fuel or food. So sometimes you're compromised and you have to travel through very difficult conditions. And so a lot of this comes down to pre-trip planning. And if you do a really good route kind of planning and setting your bearings and making sure everybody's on the same page, then usually you can get through these sections, as long as it's no avalanche danger or maybe very heavily crevassed, that kind of thing. So that's weird. And then general GPS, you can always put your waypoints in. This does help you. Doesn't necessarily tell you exactly where to go, but it definitely helps. And then you're going to have to be able to navigate through glaciers, obviously. And then also if someone falls in a crevasse, you're going to have to rescue them. The reality in Canada is that if you fall in a crevasse or you're in an avalanche or you're in an accident, you're going to have to deal with it yourself. And you might have assistance, but it might take a very long time for it to get to you. It's not like a 30-minute, turnaround time in Chamonix type thing. It could be days before people get to you, that kind of thing, just because of distances and logistics. Winter camping skills. You can learn this actually fairly quick, because you'll realize what you should and should not do. So winter camping, it's actually kind of fun, pretty neat, and you end up in places like this, which are pretty special, and so it's pretty neat. And then you have to cook off of white gas, usually is what we were using, and just know how to pack a meal and that kind of stuff. Maybe a bit about trip selection. If you do consider doing these from the UK, you might consider giving yourself as much time as possible. Typically, 3 weeks, because it gives you a bit more flexibility. You could do a traverse in 2 weeks, but you're starting to not give yourself the ability to have a second plan. You're putting all your eggs in one basket, and essentially if it doesn't work out, then your trip might not go accordingly what you think, or you might not achieve your A to B route. You might have to go A and then have to bail halfway through, or you might just not be able to start the trip. And that's due to weather, avalanche conditions, and just general logistics. So the more time you have, the better it is. And so say, for example, you're on the coast mountains and it's very warm, you might consider, it's very warm in this area. You might consider a plan B and do, a trip in the Rockies. So it is definitely a good idea to have plan A and a plan B, and then give yourself enough time. Just generally, the elevation, this kind of is an elevation map. It's not as high as the Alps, and so it's high up in the coast range a bit, up by Waddington. So it gets a little higher up here, and then the Rockies as well. But a lot of the skiing terrain that you'll be in is under 3,000 meters. A lot of the weather, so this is what I was saying before, comes in from the west. So if it is coming from the west, on the coast, you end up with a lot higher chance of being in a whiteout, I would say, or in poor conditions quickly than say the Rockies, just because it's so close to the sea. And for example, if you're about to start your trip and you hear in the news or you hear in the bulletin that there's a Pineapple Express and you're about to start a ski traverse around Whistler, you might decide again just to start thinking about going to the Rockies, vice versa. And then this is just a general idea of how much snow or how much precip you get in the band. So you can obviously see the green along the western edge, and that's the Coast Range. So that's why you're going to get loads and loads of snow, and because of that, you get a lot of foul weather. And so the coast is a difficult place to do ski traverses in the winter, especially. Maybe in the springtime, in late, mid-April onwards in May, that's the ideal time to go. And that's pretty much the ideal time to do most of the traverses, because that's when we get our better weather and longer periods and sunnier days and longer days. Snowpack wise is varying degrees. So on the coast, typically the snow will hit the mountain. It'll be a surface instability, and it'll stick to the mountain. Whereas in the Rockies, you're dealing with basal issues. So usually layers that are not so good in the bottom of the snowpack. So you have to wait again till April for things to settle out. And then again, these are all the routes that you could choose. Basically some logistics. This is the book I was talking about earlier, John Baldwin. It's an excellent read. It has day trips. It has hut trips, all the huts in it on the coast, base camp trips. It's an amazing book. It's just a neat book to have, and definitely well worth buying if you're considering skiing in the coast. The next one is Schick Scott, as I mentioned. He wrote two books, two guidebooks. One's the Canadian Rockies, one's the Columbia Basin. And these ones, again, will have a really good description of general ski tours that you can do, and a lot of great info. So definitely, if you're thinking about doing these kind of trips, you can buy these online, easy enough, and they'll arrive, and then you can start planning. Maps are harder to find now, and this is the one source that seems to be probably the best one, is Yellow Maps. You can pre-order your maps on this site, and then basically, yeah, you get them, and this is the fun part. You get to start planning. The one thing to consider is that Canadian maps are definitely lack detail, I would say. So you have to interpret them quite a bit. So if you look at this compared to, say, a Swiss map, you'll be wondering where is the cliff that you've just found on a Canadian. If you're skiing in Canada and you think, there's no cliff there. There could be a cliff within the top of the contours. So the detail in the map is a bit lacking. And then you get these maps, and this is the fun part, is actually drawing out the route, using the guidebook, figuring out logistics, figuring out how you're gonna get out of a situation before it happens. So what if we have to turn around? What are our key exit points? What are the cruxes? And in this period of time, it's good to get photos. So generally you're asking people that have done it before, usually have a lot of photos. And luckily now online, you can probably get most of the crux photos relatively easy. And it's quite fun starting to figure out how much distance you're going to travel and dreaming about actually getting on the skis. Other considerations are some way of communicating. InReach is amazing, because I think when we did it, we just had a sat phone and we used it sparsely, and it was just in case we need to get a weather update. We only used it once or twice in our trips, whereas in InReach you can probably get a forecast and weather update daily, and you'd be fine with regards to battery coverage. So it's pretty cool. You definitely need some kind of device to be able to talk. InReach obviously has a delay, and a sat phone has its advantage if you need to if you need assistance to liaise with a helicopter. So they have pluses and minuses, but you definitely need something in order to communicate in case of emergency. And then there's the whole food packing thing. You're going for 14 days. You need to figure out what you're going to eat and what would make you want to eat as well and give you enough energy. So a variety of different flavors was really good. This is kind of neat. I just looked online and loads of examples of this, but you can make your own stuff really easy. And yeah, it's pretty neat. And then you have to figure out where you're going to put your food cache. And luckily enough, in Canada, there are a lot of helicopter operators, likewise a lot of heli-ski operations that can put in food caches into really remote places for pretty next to nothing. You know, a lot of them are flying by. If you sweet talk them and give them a case of beer or something, you might find that they'll drop off your cache, no problems, no questions asked, and which is pretty neat. And so you can get flown in sometimes with them, and so they are the local guides and heli ski and cat ski operations are a really good resource to try use if your traverse goes through some of their terrain. And then obviously Avalanche Canada with their bulletins. This is quite good. You can get your avalanche information maybe sent to you by a friend via like an inReach text, and so you can get updates all the time. If you look at this map, this is the map of the forecast area of British Columbia and a bit of Alberta. And you can see large swaths of it, basically, like this chunk right here is an area with no forecast. And in these areas are so large that the forecasts are pretty vague. So it'll give you a detailed kind of synopsis, much like in the Alps, but it'll just be a little bit vague. And then off you go. You're off on your adventure and your ski turn. And when you're out there again, you can get a lot of good information sent to you via inReach. And this is basically the bulletin. You probably can get parts of this sent to you easy enough. So that's enough logistics and all that kind of stuff. The traverses that I did were mainly, there was a bit of a interest in just doing them, but there was also an ulterior motive of basically, in order to be accepted into the guides training course, he had enough experience doing these kind of longer trips, and I did several of them. So one of the first ones I did were a series of short ones, bite-sized things that I thought, oh, I'll try it and see how I do. And then I gained a little confidence. They never really worked out that well. There was always some kind of issue, maybe poor group selection, poor performance in kind of navigation. I just logistically just didn't get it. And so there was some mishaps, but nothing major, but just, I never really, never achieved going from A to B. And then I thought, well, I might as well try a larger one. So why not choose one of the larger ones, which is the Great Divide at the time. And so this one is 350 kilometers, goes from Jasper in the north all the way to Lake Louise. And it follows the high line of the Continental Divide. It's pretty epic. The time we did it was about 2005, so it was pre-digital camera. So a friend of mine, he took his camera, and I said, well, that's a lot of weight, so you can take photos. And we only got about 5 photos out of the trip, but a lot of really great memories. In total, this trip took us 21 or 22 days. And we put in 3 caches all along the way. So put one about here, I think. Let's draw it. Put a food cache here. We skied that in. And then we had a series of smaller ones put in. There's actually one here. And then we had a series of smaller ones. I think it was right there somewhere. just dotted along. So a 4-day one, a 9-day food cache. And a food cache is basically just all your food for 9 days in a wood box. And you put it in the snow and you bury it and hope no wolverines or any animals find it, basically. Because if they do, then your trip's done, basically. And it goes through some pretty epic terrain, a lot of glaciated terrain. And on this traverse, we didn't see anybody till the last 2 days. So it's 19 days without seeing anybody, no trace, no nothing, no helicopters. It was pretty amazing. And there were a lot of moments that were slightly interesting. Sometimes you just end up needing a break. You jump under here. On one of the occasions, just getting near the next photo, I think right here, it's just before, the day before this, we had a series of quite a large storm, and it snowed about 50 centimeters. And the one guy that I was with, he was very goal orientated, I would say. And he really wanted to finish this trip. And he said, we got to move today. And I wasn't too keen on traveling with 50 centimeters of new snow due to avalanche conditions. And likewise, it was just a whiteout. It was pretty heinous travel. And so we had to travel through a heavily glaciated area, abseil down off of a peak onto a steep slope. And the first 2 people went down, and I was the last person, and I ended up getting caught in an avalanche and pushed it out and went for a small ride. No injuries. I was at the back of the avalanche, but all those kind of spidey senses, all that group dynamics that we talk about, basically that was all happening that day. And to say I wasn't too happy about the whole thing was an understatement. And I just wanted to get to camp that day. And so we were skiing down a glacier in the whiteout, roped up, and then I basically fell off a cliff afterwards, and then that was the end of the day. So it was a short little buttress, fell about 5 meters, and I was lucky enough that I was caught on like a little plateau, and that was it. That was our day. So you have moments like that on these traverses, maybe. And I was 20, and a lot of it was like I had a very big ski experience, so I could ski down anything. But the reality is I had limited mountain experience. And I remember that one for sure, and got away with it twice in one day. And the rest of the trip, woke up, and this is our next day. And we skied down here. And that's myself and my girlfriend at the time. And we were about at this stage when we actually heard someone behind, or saw someone behind us ski down, and they actually fell in a crevasse, and they had to get rescued, or they were self-rescued out of it. And so a lot of things happening. And but after this, the trip went fairly smooth. One of the things we didn't do too well was the timing on this, which is the rappel. This is actually the incident a couple years ago that the cornice fell and hit one of the Eagles members. And likewise, I think we were probably in the same situation where it was very warm, and we could have equally have been hit when we did the traverse, because we actually were using the old rappel line as well. And we had arrived too late for the rappel, and we should have just actually camped and waited for overnight freeze so the cornice didn't drop on us. And so all these things you kind of reflect on these trips when you kind of start to realize that, I won't ever do that again. And so I think the way I would do a traverse now obviously would be a lot different. And then you carry on and you keep walking. At this point, we were getting near the end of the traverse, and things had got really, really warm. And this is what typically happens in some portion of your trip, especially longer ones, is that the snow becomes isothermal. And then we were just dealing with really difficult knee-breaking kind of conditions, and whether it was worthwhile to keep on going. We managed to keep going, and then we had a good overnight freeze. And that was basically the Great Divide in 21 days. And with a couple definitely incidents that won't be repeated. And next year we followed up with doing the McBride. The McBride is on the coast, so it's a year later, and we just decided to do another one. And this one, you can see on the map, starts off in Whistler, and then goes all the way around, and it basically goes down to Squamish. It's not excessively long, but it's pretty neat, especially the back portion, right around here. This section is quite nice. And yeah, it was good. It was myself, Brian, who also was kind of trying to get into the Guides Association, and then three other friends that we asked to come along, and kind of we made quite a large group, and we set off. And yeah, it was interesting having more people in a group. It led to a lot of maybe weird dynamics, where we had different situations where people had different ideas of where we were going. And yeah, and likewise, I think Brian and I at the time were the most experienced out of all the other guys. And so they were doing their first real ski traverse. And one of the things I noted was that there were 2 tents. And because of the 2 tents, there seemed to be 2 ideas of how to, there's always 2 ways of doing things, but with the tents, it seemed that there were 2 kind of mindsets, or 2 different approaches to how we were going to go through the terrain. And this was fine when we had nice weather. It was easy because you could see what you're doing. But then when it went white, it was a bit harder, because then you ended up following kind of someone who you believe you're going to the same place. And this is maybe just a lack of forethought of trying to get the group together in the mornings to decide where we're going to go on the map. And so it worked okay for a couple of days. And then, of course, we're on the coast, and it started getting worse and worse weather. And the next day, we were basically doing this for the whole day. So he's got a pressure cord, and he's whipping the snow to see what's in front of him. Hindsight, looking back at this, we probably should have roped up, because you have one person just kind of walking around. We weren't on glaciers at the time, but still you could fall off of a ledge or a cornice easy enough. So we probably should have been roped up. Maybe it was. Anyways, we went on for a while, and then we ended up in a situation where we weren't progressing as quick as we could. And then you're going across these big slopes, and you look up, and there's a double-decker bus cornice over top of you, and you're kind of like, this doesn't make you feel great. And then we just came to the realization that the weather was turning so poor that we then had to pull the pin. And that's kind of the harder decision to make, because it usually involves a really long ski out. And this ski out was 25 kilometers worth of bush and forest. The first part was relatively easy, and then it got into this floodplain, and then it was like match sticks, very slow progress, and falling into water and traversing Muskeg forever. And it seemed like a very long day. And so that one was pretty interesting, because it showed that you definitely, having 2 tents was problematic, and definitely having 2 ideas of how to go through the terrain was a big issue. And that's probably one of the reasons why we didn't accomplish our trip. The other one was just hard whiteout travel and a really crux position where we couldn't go on because there was too much snow on one of the slopes. So we had no choice, really. Right after this traverse, Brian and we met up with a friend of ours, Pierre, and we decided to do the Northern Caribous traverse. And so that was This one starts off right about here. Oh shoot, I'll go back one. Starts right out of here. It's Valemont, is right here. And we actually were decided to go a different way than what the guidebook said. We decided to go south to north in order to ski the north faces. And so we went down through there, the Premier Range, and then up all the way up to McBride. And that's about 150 kilometers. So it should take, upwards to 2 weeks at the most. I think we did it in 10 days on this one. We met in Valemont. Maybe one thing to consider is make sure your gear is ready. Pierre, this is Pierre on the left. He basically, his skins were not ready, and so he had to re-glue his skins just before we left on the trip. So have your gear ready is one thing. We jumped in the helicopter in Yellowhead, and it was relatively cheap actually to get up to the Premier Range. It was a quick flight. I think it was only 20 minutes worth of flight time. So bang for buck, this was a pretty cool area to go to. Big glaciation, and yeah, pretty neat. We even put a fuel cache or a food cache in a zero pass. So we flew up and over, put our food cache in, and then went back a little bit to where we wanted to do our ski tour. And we spent actually 3 days here just skiing around in this terrain before moving on. And we kind of knew that weather was coming, but we thought, we should make this work. And so we had a pretty good time skiing around in this area. And that is Cartier. And you don't actually ski the front face, obviously, but you can kind of go around the back of it, and up the ridge to the summit. And these peaks are all fairly high. I think they're like 3,600 meters. So that's pretty high for Canada in general. So, or for this southern section, I should say. And then we had to access this glacier. And this is actually from that Cartier. And this is the North Caribou. This is the North Caribou Glacier, and this is the South. And both these you have to kind of navigate up, and we were going to basically travel up through here, cross, and go down, and then you climb up here over this pass, and then down into Azure Pass. Now, just as we got to about here, this is when it would start to snow pretty heavily. And so we had to do all this and up through there, all in the whiteout. It was quite complex terrain. We had glimmers of light that helped, but it was definitely difficult. We had to ski down through heavily glaciated terrain with a rope because we couldn't see anything, and make our way up. And we got up to this position here, and then we got stuck in a tent. And we got stuck in the tent for, I think it was 3 days. And it snowed and snowed and snowed and snowed because we were on the top of the mountain and there was lots of wind. And so every 4 hours we had to dig our tent out. And in the morning you have a collapsing tent. We did try to venture out once and then quickly realized there was no way it was going to happen. And then quickly, we're very thankful that we actually put the camp waypoint on the GPS, because we would have no chance of finding camp. So we got stuck in our tent. Everything got kind of not the greatest. It was interesting, and we started to eat quite a bit of food, and then it cleared, and it was amazing. We got out and. We made our way down to Azure Pass, and the key thing is we were trying to find our food cache that was flown in. We had great skiing on the way down. It was really fun got down into the old growth. It was actually relatively easy to ski through. And then we climbed up to the next pass. And yeah, it's just stunning kind of mountains all around you, and great skiing. Found our food cache, which was a bit nerve-wracking to try find it, but the helicopter pilot had put a flag in for us, which is pretty cool. And we marked it obviously with a GPS, but the flag helped quite a bit. And this is an example of our food cache, just a wood box, and then you slightly. This is back in 2000. We burn it basically with excess fuel. Not the most environmentally friendly. You might want to do that a different way now, but that's 20 years on. Yeah, and we got our food cache and carried on. And now we actually had quite a considerable distance to travel. So we started heading north, and we put in 3 days of 30 kilometers, I think, and 2,000 meters each day worth of elevation gain to get ahead, because we'd lost, 2 or 3 days in a tent. And yeah, it was difficult days, but he traveled through some pretty amazing terrain. And again, lots of great skiing, nobody around, didn't see anybody, more or less, again. And this is kind of what you're doing. You get to the top of a pass, you ski down to a lake or a stream, you try to find some water, you climb up the other side, and set up camp. Maybe you do an extra little fun bit of skiing without the backpack, and you carry on. And it's pretty neat. I think this trip worked really well, partly just because of the group size. There was only 3 people. We were in one tent, and I think we were all like-minded. So I think there was less dramas of sorts with regards to kind of human dynamics. And in evenings, it was stunning. You have these amazing sunsets to the west, and you just be high up in the peaks. And we actually had pretty good skiing the whole way on this trip. We more or less ski powder, and that's partly the reason why we went south to north, was to take advantage of skiing, trying to get good skiing on that way instead of skiing like melt freeze or breakable crust. And then we went through some heavily glaciated terrain. Some of the photos I didn't really take in the heat of the moment, but yeah, you got them in a memory of sorts. And then you strip off. And the one thing you notice, especially with your backpacks, you'd have like a super heavy backpack, and you'd barely be able to ski with 7 days worth of food. And then as you got down to 4 days of food, all of a sudden, you felt a lot better, and it was a lot lighter and a lot easier, and you were feeling a lot more nimble. So definitely, as we kept on doing these traverses, we started putting more and more caches in shorter distances if we could, and that definitely helped with the load on the back of sorts. And again, ski powder, so it was a pretty good skiing. We did have one incident somewhere around here. I'm not quite sure where in this thing, but we were in a whiteout situation in non-glaciated terrain, but we're on a ridge line, and we decided to rope up because we knew the ridge was quite steep. And in actual fact, Pierre had fallen over a short little lip, and we managed to catch him. And yeah, I think that was a good choice of sorts. Maybe not a good choice, kind of trying to figure out, but we had to get through that one section. So when in doubt, do rope up along ridge lines and whiteouts, obviously. And then the skiing wasn't always amazing because you sometimes had to go down to the lower portions, and you'd have to go through old avalanche debris and alder trees, and so sometimes it took quite a bit. And we took breaks when we could. I think I remember we just finished a really long haul, and it was really warm, and we just decided to sleep 2 or 3 hours here. And we took a break before heading off, and again, no one around you. It's pretty neat. One thing that is of note is the need to take care of your feet. On the Great Divide, my friend Phil, he actually had his feet, he was wearing Intuition liners, and they actually got too warm. He more or less got trench foot, I think. And it was all very red, and very, very sore. So definitely have to manage your feet quite well, especially in the springtime. It seemed to sweat quite a bit. And so I used to powder my feet with baby powder. Don't know if it worked, but I basically made sure that I always had dry socks going in as much as possible, and that seemed to not lead to issues of sorts. Pierre had some blisters on this, so you can imagine blisters over 10 days, and not really that great. So yeah, personal hygiene, definitely, it's your feet is the main hazard for sure. And we continued skiing north, and yeah, it was neat. We got closer and closer to McBride, and then we just had a really logging roads are basically your access roads, so we managed to get out fairly easy. And yeah, and then we got picked up by a family, and somewhere around here just after this photo, and the gentleman basically drove us from McBride all the way to Valemount, an hour out of his own. We were going to have a friend drive up, and we were going to stay in McBride, and he just said, "Oh, I'll drive you down there, no worries." And so he drove us, almost 100K to our starting point. So it was pretty nice locals and stuff. That was more or less our trips. Yeah, and one of the things about these trips is that it sounds kind of wow, they're really adventurous. They're a lot of work. There are a lot of chance to get yourself into predicaments, so you do have to be mindful of that, especially if you're 20. But I think all that, especially more so, like, it seems like it's a lot of hardship, but it isn't. It's pretty amazing. And the one thing you kind of get addicted to them. And so the springtime rolls around, and you're already thinking about doing it again the next year. And so they're pretty neat experiences, and especially if you go with your teammates or your crew, whoever's in your tent, you get to know them very well. You get to know the people that don't get up in the mornings and you have to make coffee, and you kind of you take the best of whatever that person, whatever you can give, or whatever that person is, and you kind of work as a team, and it's a pretty amazing experience. So yeah, that's a bit about it. I have a couple more things maybe. And let's see. Yes, to pulk or not to pulk. Yeah, so I've never pulked, but I think I can understand when maybe to use it. And for a lot of the traverses we were doing, we were going really steep and then really down. And a pulk just doesn't seem maybe I have better knees then too. I probably changed my mind now, but I think with a lot of the traverses that don't have flat glaciers, I think you're going to find that the pulk is more pain than just putting it on your back and muscling it up. Maybe not. Maybe I should try a pulk, but definitely on the flatter glaciers on the coast, I can see a pulk for large part of the longer, big flat glaciers. When you're kind of big distances between slopes, it makes sense for a pulk. Yeah, and this is part of the problem, is the pulk kind of dragging you around, and especially when you're skiing, you just don't get to ski, and that's part of a ski traverse, I guess, for me. But they're easy to make, and I can see why on flatter terrain it makes sense. Another thing, maybe when you don't have food caches, if you can't get a food cache and you have to carry over 7 days of food, it starts to become really heavy. So I can understand having to do that. and that's another good place to use a pulk. But if you have lots of food caches, you probably can get away with not having a pulk. That's my opinion, though, obviously. Other things that are worth considering is wildlife. There's a lot of wildlife. The one most likely to annoy you at night is the pine marten. It'll find whatever food you have. So it's worth kind of burying your food and cleaning your food. Typically you're up in the higher elevation, but when you're down in the valley bottoms, this is where you're going to have to be careful with wildlife, especially the pine marten's probably the most aggressive. It doesn't really care. It'll come pretty quick. The ravens are also likewise. They're pretty smart. So if you're in a place for a while, they'll find your food fairly quick. Bears. Bears are around in the springtime, obviously. If you're moving around, I think, and you're constantly moving, you're less likely to see them. Obviously, if you're sitting in one spot, you might find a bear, or they might find you. And then this one is the one that gets food caches quite a bit. Wolverines are typically the ones that you'll put a cache somewhere, and they'll destroy bear-proof kind of drums. They're pretty ferocious. So there's been a couple of ski traverses end fairly quickly due to wolverines. So you have to be mindful. And the wolverine, you can't do much. If it finds your food, it finds your food. So that's just the way it is. So that's more or less what I have for you guys. So maybe I'll bring it back and let Kathy ask some questions and stuff. Still going? Did I share it?
Unmute the microphone. That always helps. Thank you. It was an absolute masterclass in how to prepare for Canadian ski traverses. Yeah. A little off-putting, perhaps, how
no,
it is.
Yeah. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be.
So if people have got questions, please type them into the chat box and we'll pick them up. But I'll start. Is there a great white whale for you? Is there a ski traverse you haven't done yet that you'd really like to do?
Well, looking back to the photos, you start to think about a couple of them. Yeah, I'd really like to do the Bug Sir Rogers. I never did that one. And I think that one's a classic. I know that the Eagles, I think Dave did it with a group. It's pretty amazing terrain, and it's a classic, and it's great skiing. So I think that is definitely one that's on the list. And then I have other ones that are shorter, that are just kind of neat little things that are kind of, it'd be great if I had time. And that's part of the problem, is I have less time. I was unemployed in my 20s quite a bit, so it made these ski traverses totally doable, whereas now it's becoming harder and harder to do in a way, unless I make time. So I should make time.
And the one that you've put on the touring schedule for 2021?
Yeah, so that's based where I've been working for the last 11 years. And it's just interlinking a bunch of the ice fields where I heli ski guide for a lot of things. So part of the reason I can put in a lot of caches without having to pay for anything. So it makes the cost go down. And logistically, it's kind of a nice cushy, I won't say dirtbag, but it makes everything a lot easier, basically.
Right. A question from Anna. What's the best time to go?
Yeah, so Emma, the best time to go would be definitely springtime. And I'd say, you're starting to look the first week of April. Second week of April is a good one. But it really depends on whether you go on the coast or if you're in the Columbia Mountains and Rockies. And I think maybe the coast, give it a little bit more time. I think you probably set yourself up a little bit better, just because it's still, the weather on the coast mountains is still convective in April. and you can get better clearing portions in the later part of April.
Are you seeing much impact from climate change on the snowpack, on the weather patterns?
Well, you can see in the glaciers for sure. You know, like I've been in the same place for 11 years, and I've seen large portions of glaciers that have receded quickly, and then also thinned out. So you see that, and that's part of the problem too. Is the maps? They're old. The datum's from like 1987. So they're not updated, and so what you see on your map is not entirely what you're going to get. And it's great though. I mean, we got Google Earth now, so you can kind of verify a lot of that. You can also put in, you know, your whole route through Google Earth. That didn't exist when I was doing these things. So that is a pretty massive resource to check that out, I think. But yeah, no, there's definitely been quite a bit of change. And, you know, year to year, it seems some years are really warm and other years are actually, like, I wouldn't say normal, but not as warm. How's that? That's being realistic.
Question from Dave Jones. Haul bags. I think he wants to know why you're not using haul bags.
But say again?
Haul bags as an alternative between pulks and...
Oh, yeah, no. Totally. I'm saying, I think it's my 20s. My knees, my ego of my 20s saying, oh, I could lift that again. Like if I actually put a backpack, I bet you anything, I'd be like, okay, yeah, I'll probably pull this on my back now. But yeah, I saw your little swivel thing. It was good.
Right. We got any other questions? I know we've got a couple of the adventure skiers here. Dave Williams, Susie, people who should have ambitions to be out there themselves. Okay, look, no. Tell us just briefly about the Iceland trip and what you got.
It's just a hut-to-hut trip. We did it 3 years ago. It worked really well. I think I'm going to try a change location and try another series of huts. And yeah, it's just nice, fun skiing, and yeah, hut-to-hut, like, but with kind of a nice.
Are these huts, you know, as in full service Swiss Alpine huts, or are these? No.
They're basically they're just a basic hut. They're kind of like Canadian huts. They'll have everything you need to cook. They'll have mattresses. It'll be warm, and that's about it. So they're unserviced, and they're nice bothies, basically. Yeah.
Question from Anna. Balance between good skis and weight.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's the width of ski actually is quite important. You get something that has enough width on it, it gives you stability, and then yeah, you don't want to get too light, because you're definitely going to be you know, far heavier than you normally are. So you need a stiffer ski than you would expect, because otherwise you got noodles and they're not going to ski properly. So it is difficult to find the right ski, I think, and that's trial and error.
And yeah. Most of your work now, you're doing sort of heli provided ski-ins to base camps, are you?
Yeah, I think majority of most of the work that we end up doing is mechanized in Canada, just because of the volume of work, basically. So we don't have the same amount of traffic, say, as the Alps for that kind of work. So, and then when I get a chance in the springtime, I end up doing that. So I miss it, to be honest. Yeah, and I think, you know, the trips in general, they sound like there's a lot of hardship. It doesn't need to be hardship. There's a bit of work to it, but I think a lot of especially if you are maybe semi-interested, this was not to be put you off at all. It's just the reality of it. And there are a lot of like smaller 2-4 day trips that you can start off with, and then you don't have to go right into the big ones. And but they're adventurous and they are wild, and that's part of the amazing allure of it. So you're many, many kilometers away. So a lot of these traverses are pretty neat.
Great. And if people are interested in doing something in Canada, but a bit intimidating, perhaps,
even for just general beta or information, feel free to contact me. I've actually, through doing this, I have a series of cool articles, a bit of history, and I think I'll probably maybe post that somehow later on. I think pretty neat reads and articles through the years over all the traverses, and yeah, they're neat. They're probably a bit more inspirational than my mishaps of sorts.
No, your mishaps are great. They make it feel real, serious. Great. Any other questions from anybody before we wrap up for the evening? No, looks like we're done. Lots of thanks for a great talk. Dave Wynne-Jones claims that it's not that hard, but that's fine. We don't trust Dave when it comes to hardship. Susie's saying she wants to do Bugs to Rogers, which I agree with Susie. Yes, I'm in. Dave Williams, how heavy was your bag? Dave's getting competitive here.
Yeah.
So what weights were you carrying on these traverses in your rucksack? Do you know?
I don't know. They're really hard. Like my hips hurt. Yeah, I remember one part on the Great Divide. We had 9 days of food on us, and we had to climb 2,000 meters. And we had ropes, tent, fuel. It was heavy, and I think the first 3 days are pretty difficult. But then you just get used to it. It's surprising how we adapt at dealing with it, and just kind of, okay, well, I'll carry on. And you have a good backpack, it's pretty good. So I think what I had here for rough weight was 65 kilograms fully loaded, but I don't actually know how much that is. Maybe Dave knows. Dave?
Way more than the rest of us want to put in our backs in the rucksack, I think.
Yeah, no, that's why I put lots of food caches. That's why I got smarter. It was cheap back in the day. So, yeah.
Great. All right. I think that's a good place to wrap up. Thank you. We really appreciate all the work that you put into that. Really, really interesting. Everybody, if I can encourage you to come back next month, we're continuing our tour around the world. Andy Perkins is going to be talking about adventurous, accessible expedition skiing in Greenland. So we'll see you all Wednesday, 21 October, 8 p.m.